Hey guys and geeks, welcome back to the Geekritique show. I'm Jen.
I'm Dakota. I'm Dakota.
And we're here to talk about Name of the Wind. This
Yes.
is our second week in our book club, and we're quite excited. We have a lot to say. A lot of crazy stuff happened.
And you guys have a lot to say.
Yes, you do.
Several of you have commented a bunch of stuff that we're going to be going through. Hopefully we can get to all of it.
But yeah, thank you for everybody who sent in your comments, and then for those of you who didn't, maybe next week.
Or you can just comment in the comment section below what you thought about these chapters. Again, we're going to be covering chapters 16 through 34, but you can also talk about stuff that happened in the first 15 chapters or the prologue or whatever.
Just no spoilers.
No spoilers past chapter 34 in this comment section. Next video you can go on. If you guys aren't reading Name of the Wind with us, you can always go back to our introduction and start from there, and then start commenting up in our week 1 video and now our week 2 video, and we're glad to have you. If you'd like to join the book club and read this book with us, you can always do that by going to this email right here, geekritique@gmail.com, and just let me know with the title book club that you want to join our book club, and I'll put you on a newsletter and we'll get all that information out to you. But let's talk about the Name of the Wind.
Oof. Right off the bat, as soon as we started this week, we had the death of Quoth's family, which is so heartbreaking, and some people see it coming, some people feels like it comes out of nowhere, and you're like, what the heck?
It's a jarring experience, but the narrator, Coat, he actually does mention this next part, we go down, and then we go down further, but that's not the deepest part of like this story, like as far as like hitting rock bottom goes. This is a huge part in Quoth's life story, his developmental phase, and ultimately who he becomes. The series is called The King Killer Chronicle. We don't know what that means at this point.
So we don't know what he's gonna do, but we're pretty sure he might kill a king at some point.
At some point or another.
It's in the name. That's not a spoiler.
But Jen, what did you think about this chapter? Chapter 16 being like the big punch in the gut for Quoth. And
it's just so horrible because you know how dearly he loves his family. And that's why last week I almost let it slip that his family was going to die, because you see the way that he talks about them and the way that he thinks of them is only in the most positive light.
Right.
You know, it's not very realistic, and that's kind of a huge indicator that something happens to them, because he appreciates the time that he spent with them and he values it so much.
Actually, just to jump onto that point, Graf, you mentioned something in one of your emails to me this week. You said that quote that Jen made from last week was, more or less, you have to be a bit of a liar to tell a story the right way. Too much truth confuses the facts. Too much honesty makes you sound insincere.
So for some people, some of the dialogue with the family members and the troop, you know, might not seem very realistic, and you wonder, like, how much can I trust what he's saying? And that's kind of it there. I feel like he outright says he's not a liar, but
he's not telling the whole truth.
We're definitely seeing things through his eyes, which is very interesting. I feel like in modern fantasy, you really don't get that as often with just one character, and that's the only perspective you're getting.
Yeah, and this book is an anomaly when it comes to storytelling, because it breaks the mold with a first-person narrative, as well as only having one point-of-view character. Most fantasy books nowadays are multi-character storylines, which is not a bad thing. It's a format that works, but this disrupts that format a little bit and gives you something completely fresh, which we love.
Yeah, which, you know, I feel like the harmony of the story and the perspective, it's like you're really getting to know him so well through the story that he's telling. But he also mentions times that are embarrassing for him or hard for him. So it's not like he's painting himself out to be the perfect hero either, which I love. He'll outright say that he stole or he didn't help someone in need. That scene, you know, where he sees the kid, you know, in the alley below, just breaks my heart.
Right.
You know, he's standing there with the brick and he's like, I don't want to lose everything that I've worked for. That is one of the most powerful scenes in the series to me. It just breaks my heart seeing the struggle all around for everyone is horrible.
Let's talk about the actual moment when the parents, fall to the hands of the Chandrian?
It's difficult because you're heartbroken first for him, and to know he's so young and like what is he gonna do now, but then also you're getting a lot of information
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it's almost, you can kind of understand why he doesn't jump into action until the end after 3 years of living in Tarbean. At the end of that is when he starts jumping into action, because it was hard for him to like compute that information when he was just overwhelmed with so much and lost everything that he knows and loves.
We do get introduction of at least 2 of the Chandrian. Hiatus was the leader, seemed to be the leader at this point. Was he the one that was covered in shadow?
Yes.
Yeah, he was the one covered in shadow. And Cinder, we don't know exactly what he does, but he has the eyes of a goat, right?
Yeah, he has like the black eyes of a goat, and they don't show reflection in the light. And he also has like extremely pale features. He's described as moving like Mercury.
Mercury. Okay. Yeah, it's weird. We learned in a few chapters before this that Kvothe's father was actually looking into like the individual signs of these Chandrian, and it was Kvothe's mother actually that gave him the idea that each Chandrian has a specific sign, and it's not just a collective sign. And the reason that you'll receive some signs in some stories and some signs in other stories, but they don't always match up, is because they aren't always all together, and they're not always by themselves.
Yeah.
So it looks like in this part we got all 7.
Mm-hmm. It seems like it, but I wish we had gotten descriptions of the other ones.
I know.
I'm like, I need more information.
It's tough.
But we did get more descriptions of him later in Scarpy's story, getting more details on the whole background of the situation. And it's so vast and so huge that I don't even know how we will talk about all of it in such a short period of time.
Yeah, well, we'll touch upon it definitely, but like one of my favorite parts in the entire series, you mentioned that it was, or one of the most heartbreaking parts for you was like when he was looking at those kids that kid being beat up. The heartbreaking part for me was when he was alone in the forest with his lute, and then his lute broke a string. He learned to replay it with only 6 strings, and then 5 strings he learned how to play with, but with only 4 strings, it was too much. He had lost too much, so he went to Tarbean, where he lost the lute in like as a whole. He got into a fight with some kids, and
that when he gets thrown onto the lute and it breaks more, and he hears it and it splinters in his hands. You just feel for him so much. It's awful. And that's, so last week we were talking about, like, Dakota said the whole part where the whole troop and everything was hard for him. This part, Tarbean,
hard to get through necessarily.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little boring and a little long in the uptake. Go ahead.
Tarbean was really difficult for me just because I want him to leave. I'm like, why are you here? Leave. This place is awful. Just go.
Tarbean is hard to read through, even the second time, because we're reading this the second time. And it's hard because this is insult on top of injury. He's lost everything. Mm-hmm. Now he's lost his lute as well. And he's living as a street urchin for the next couple of years. And he just has a horrible time. He says he doesn't remember how many times he's been beaten in those couple of years. You just want to get out of that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, for me, I'm not a huge fan of the way the stories were told within stories and songs. Some of the stories were interesting, especially the Lanray and Mir Terrenial story. But other stories just kind of seem like mixtures of Judeo-Christian stories, almost.
Yeah, I feel like you could definitely see aspects taken from, history or religion or whatever in some of the stories. Like even Mir Terrenial very much reminded me of the story of Troy. In a lot of different ways. You have a golden city, this great leader. Even though Achilles wasn't fighting for Troy, you have this incredible fighter, this warrior that no one can parallel or touch. To me, that was very Trojan. And then obviously with like Periel and Menda, like that was clearly Mary and Jesus, because, like God, pregnant, him, God.
Save people.
The whole thing. Save people, the whole thing. So that one was pretty blatant. But yeah, I thought like you can kind of see, even like with the holidays that he had, like mourning was clearly just like Halloween and New Year's mixed together.
Yeah, that chapter is a little odd for me. I think that's the most out of place chapter in the entire book. And actually, Graf, you also mentioned that, and I want to touch upon that. You ask, I cannot remember if we get an answer to the following, but the Incanus in the Black Mask, man named Garrick, and the woman named Holly as a demon, he was the one that gave Kvothe a silver talent. Who was he? Do we see him again? I hope there's closure to this, for there seems to be a reason to state it this way. And you're right. It is a weird chapter.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it belongs, and you wonder, is something else going to happen with this?
We don't know, and actually we have read the first 2 books. We actually don't know.
Haven't heard much.
I haven't heard anything about that. But like I was saying, we get 3 full chapters of stories, whether that be Trappist telling it, or the 2 stories given by Scarpy, and that's hard for me to sit through in such close succession.
Because you want to see the furtherance of the plot, and you don't see how this applies. But you know it's important information, but since it's not applying directly to the plot, you're like, okay, I got it.
Now that
what's next?
Now that we're going back and reading it a second time, yes, these things are important. You understand more of its importance as the story progresses. And you do get hints that Lanray is actually Haliax, the one that Kvothe meets.
Kvothe outright says that, so...
Yeah, he says that later on in the book, that he's basically going to the university to learn more about these guys. So that he can take them
down. Yeah. He basically said, like, he knows the Emir are their enemies. Mm-hmm. So how do I go about taking them down? And... do you want to go into the comments next, or?
Well, you actually just talked about the Emir, so let's talk about that really quick. Spencer, you said something that is interesting. You mentioned that about the Ancient Order of Magical Knights that fight against Haliax and his 7. Now, I'm not sure if Haliax is one of those 7 or not.
That is a really cool name.
Yeah. Also, what a supremely awesome name. Yeah, it is a very cool name. That Ancient Order of Magical Knights that fight against Haliax, we know that they are the Emir. We don't know much about them. They were described in the original story. Besides that was I'm assuming that's several thousand years ago.
Kvothe actually says how long ago it was.
Well, no, he says the last time there were recorded Emir was 300 years ago.
Okay.
I guess that kind of brings me to the point that you wanted to bring up.
This is my thing with Scarpy, and this is not a spoiler because we don't really know much about him other than
this is totally theory. Speculation and stuff.
We know that Chronicler at the beginning of the story said that he was sent by Scarpy. Basically, like he kind of just outright says that, I'm pretty sure. Or something that he said leads us to assume that. So we know that everybody in the world either thinks Kvothe is dead or in hiding and nobody knows where he is. But for some reason this Scarpy guy, who we don't really know that much about other than what we're getting in these chapters, knows exactly where Kvothe is and sends Chronicler to find out his story. Then Scarpy is telling these stories of Lanray, which everyone else is afraid of. We know that Kvothe's father sung a song about Lanray, and his entire troop was killed for it. That just leads me to wonder, who is this Scarpy guy that seems to know a lot of things, and doesn't seem to give 3 craps about what the Changrian are doing and if they're going to come for him. Right. And then even when he's being, outright affronted by the Justice, he says a lot of, really interesting things, such as when the Justice says to him, "God have mercy on your soul," and Scarpy says, this isn't verbatim, but Scarpy says back, "You don't know how funny that sounds coming from you." That to me is who are you? What is your purpose? What are you doing? And why are you, telling stories to children? Why are all of the secrets of the world hidden in children's stories? Is this Scarpy doing that? Is he keeping the riddles and the truths alive through...
Well, no, he wouldn't have that much, he's too young for that, obviously.
No, I'm saying, who's perpetuating all of these stories, these, children's rhymes that are true about things going on in the world? We don't know who the Scythe are. Is that their purpose? What are they doing? Why is he telling these stories to children? And then also, too, he almost is treating the Justice and all of them you're making a huge mistake. You don't know who I am. He was, laughing at them. He did not care. He wasn't afraid of them at all. And then he even says to Kvothe, "You need to leave, but I have friends in the church who can save me."
Right.
Who who the heck is this guy? Who are you?
And we actually think that he might be Amir.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, just based on the information that we're given.
Right.
He sounds like he knows a lot.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
Another point that I wanted to bring up, and this is kind of what I mentioned last week, where I might seem like an absolute psychopath, but I can't help but notice the repetition of the 3, which is something I've mentioned, like there's a lot of patterns with numbers. So far, Kvothe needs to tell his story in 3 days. The Tinker repays things back to people in forms of 3. With Tarbean, he was there for 3 years. With Denna, it's on the 3rd day that they have their most meaningful conversation. When Kvothe is leaving Tarbean, he visits 3 different shops, and at the end he gets the best experience and leaves the coppers, or copper jots or copper pennies or whatever for the man. And it really bugs me. Like, and I don't know if maybe this is just Rothfuss's writing formula, but to me it seems like a lot more in the fact that he mentions things. Even when Kvothe and Denna are looking at the clouds, she mentions 3 different things that they see in the clouds. And I'm like, what does it mean? What does it mean? Why is it here?
That might just be a clever storytelling agent that Rothfuss uses in his writing to 3rd time's a charm.
Oh yeah, that's true.
That phrase really does like resonate from a literary perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
There might be more to it. There might be a more symbolic reason to it. I don't know if we will ever see like an actual like explanation.
But we just know that's how their world works. That, you know, the 3rd time probably will be the charm.
Yeah. Who knows?
Who knows? So yeah, that's my input. Why don't we go into the comments though?
Hey guys and geeks, welcome back. I know it's odd hearing that in the middle of a video, but for us it feels like we're starting afresh because about 30 minutes of what we recorded yesterday was completely lost due to our mic just shutting off midway through, so
that sucked.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to go back and go over some of you guys' comments that we missed, that didn't work in the recording previously. And we apologize for the late timing of this book week. We're going to try not, I mean, technical difficulties aside, we're going to try not to miss any Mondays again.
It's just so annoying because we had everything set and ready to go, and we would have totally been on time.
Yes.
Ish. For us.
Yeah. But anyway, this week we want you guys to read, I forget if we mentioned it yesterday, and it's actually good quality audio, but chapters 35 through 50. Alright, and we'll meet back next Monday. If you have any thoughts, if you finish it early or whatever, you can always email me at geekritique@gmail.com, your thoughts, and we can use it in the show. Just keep it clean and short-ish.
Short, sweet, and no spoilers.
No spoilers for the furtherment of the book. But anyway, Spencer, you were the first one to get back to me this week. So you said, so much for the traveling caravan I love so much. And you mentioned previously that you really liked that setting of Kvothe with his family on the caravan.
Yeah, we read your comment and we just kind of looked at each other like, meh, womp womp.
Can't say too much about that, but now we can. And that is one of the most traumatic moments in the entire book, so yeah. Anyway. Yeah, absolutely. The amount of history and lore that was covered in these chapters kept me absolutely riveted all the way through. Telu and the Burning Wheel was great. But Lanray's betrayal and the fall of Mirtarenia was something else entirely. Chapter 26 of The Name of the Wind is perhaps one of the most beautiful and haunting stories I have ever read in any work of literature. Period. Well, I can't argue that.
Yeah, it's really interesting in so many different ways. Like, not only is it poetically written, but the, you know, amount of emotion that it's able to convey, and confusion. But it totally reminded me of Greek mythology, and especially Mirtarenia reminded me of the city of Troy in a lot of ways, just because it's on like a hilltop. It's called the Golden City. You know, the leader Cerulean, just the whole thing, and you know, even though Achilles didn't fight for Troy, the fact that you have this like leader who no one else can touch, maybe even comparable to Hector instead of Achilles. I don't know. I thought it was very, like, the parallels were interesting to me.
It's interesting that you enjoyed the stories and the songs that were written in these chapters. Or, it was 3 stories. Yeah, 3 stories this time. Whereas my first reading of the book, it was really hard for me to get through those chapters because it's full chapters of the plot not moving forward at all. Until Scarpy gets taken down by those people. But we already talked about Scarpy in yesterday's video. I know that audio is good, so we can move forward from there. But you also said week 1, you had my interest. Week 2, you have my attention. Well, I hope week 3 hooks you. Like,
hook, line, and sinker, you know what I'm saying?
I'm sure it will, actually. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Spencer.
We appreciate it.
Graph, thank you for your thoughts. You sent me 2 emails, and we're going to try to get through as much of your points as possible. It is an amazing tale, for one. Both losing his parents was a real gut punch. Yep, I felt it right there.
Yeah, right in the kisser.
You also compare Tarbean to when you visited New York City for the first time. You said that you were from a rural community in Indiana, and being in the big city was such a culture shock to you. You felt so out of place. You might as well have been an urchin. I mean, you didn't personally live on the streets like both. I don't think you have. But you were able to connect with him there in such a big city, you know?
Yeah, and I think I lived in the Bronx, which is technically a part of New York City, but not as, you know, it's not Manhattan. But I was regularly going over, you know, into Manhattan. But I remember the first time that I ever went to the city with people from a smaller town that I had never been before. It was, you know, pretty incredible to see just like how, like, overly stimulated they were, or like their, like, all of their senses. Like, I think it was too much for them, and things that were like common sense to me, or, you know, which totally aren't, to them was really confusing. And like I cannot seeing, you know, this, because you think of Kvothe when he was when he was traveling with the Rue troop, he even said he wasn't really allowed, like, it was looked upon to kind of go into the towns alone. So he had never been in a city, let alone that big, but alone by himself. So I can't imagine, you know, what an adjusting period that was, in spite of all that he was already going through.
Trappist and his children is a neat safe haven. I know there are many people in this world that are givers. He exemplifies them. And yeah, shout out to those people, because as much as I would want to be one, I don't know how I would even compare to someone like Trappist. You know? He does such a... It breaks my heart. This is the only time, like, I got really close to tearing up in the story, was when Trappist was able to see through Kvothe, through his clothes, to the kid that he was.
Yeah, that was such a... We were listening to that in the car together, and we were both, like, choked up, like, oh, that got you.
Yeah.
What? Hush, hush.
Hearing the story of Lanray now a second time makes a lot more sense. Still, so many questions, and we can agree with that.
Yeah, it does feel like, you know, it does connect some dots, but it kind of does feel like a, you know, a story from Greek mythology, or just like any mythological, like, you know, ancient tale, where you don't really get, like, why the characters did what they did. Like, it's written very poetically, but you feel like everyone's intentions are a little bit skewed. Like, we don't know what the real reason is that anybody's doing anything in that story. But I really appreciated Selitos a lot more this time around, and I was paying more attention to him than I did in the first read.
And speaking of the story of Lanray, you also mentioned that the introduction of the Chandrian was amazing. Yes, obviously, their intro to the series is one, like, it's a bone-chilling entrance. They literally come, show up, kill his entire family for singing a song that they shouldn't have been singing. It's crazy, and we know that Haliax was Lanray at one point, and Lanray fell, becoming Haliax. And you mentioned that their description was so palpable. Cinder's questions to Kvothe. You also mentioned it was as if you were seeing it when they turned around, that they were seeing you, yourself, and not Kvothe. And I can totally attest to that, because when you're reading that chapter, you just want Kvothe to, like, hide behind a tree. You want him to, like, hide behind something and not be seen, but, you know, it's gonna happen.
Even too, when he was hiding, what was that, behind, like, an iron wheel, and that, like, crumbles and falls. and then he's just standing there. You just feel like, oh god. Feel for him.
Yeah, so that's 3 signs that we, or 4 at this point, that we can like say are totally Chandrian things, like the iron rusting away. Blue flame. Haliax is covered in shadow, and Cinder has the eyes of a goat.
That don't show reflections of light.
Yeah.
And he moves like Mercury.
Why did they leave both? Even on the second reading, I still wonder about that. Was it a flaw? Well, we learn later about the Emir.
In that chapter, Haliax notices it first, but he looks at a fixed point in the sky, in the twilight sky. And after that, the rest of the Chandrian all kind of look, and you can feel something. And I think it was Haliax that says they're coming, and he gets them to go underneath his cloak of shadow, and they leave. So we're just speculating, but I'm wondering if that's the Emir, and I wonder if what they saw has any relation to the moon.
Right, because it was in twilight, that scene that took place. They were looking into the twilight sky, so that
I wonder if the moon. Yeah, I wonder if the moon, arrived. If I don't know, what face of the moon it has to be or anything like that. I don't know anything about it, but that's the impression that I had on the first read. Like something bigger is coming, and Haliax even mentions to Cinder, who's going to protect you from the Emir, the Singers, and the Scythe. So we know that they do have enemies, which Kvothe realizes later after Tarbean, and I think one of their enemies was coming for them.
Interesting.
Because they did just cause a crazy amount of destruction, so I feel like someone was on their heels.
Totally. I too questioned why he didn't seek out Abinthy. It was my first thought. He had a bond with him, but when I heard his explanation, I understood. And that explanation was simply, he was so far away, he didn't even know how he would have survived the journey, basically. Mm-hmm. Our goldfish is making a lot of noise. He wants to input here. He wants to talk about Abinthy's book that he loved, Rhetoric and Logic. Yeah. And the inscription that Kvothe, our fish is named is Kvothe, so he feels a special bond to that Rhetoric and Logic book that Abinthy gave us.
Wow, and that's a really interesting point, Kvothe, that you just made, because that inscription, I feel like it does tell us a lot more than... We're so lame. I feel like it does tell us a lot more than... I think it shows Abinthy knows more than he lets on. Okay.
So, the inscription that Abinthy left Kvothe in Rhetoric and Logic.
It says, Kvothe, defend yourself well at the university. Make me proud. Remember your father's song. Be wary of folly. Your friend, Abinthy. And it's interesting because, on the adjacent page, we have what Kvothe and Abinthy have heard of his father's song, Kvothe's father's song about Lanray, and it really doesn't give us a lot of information. And then it says, be wary of folly, and it's like, what a vague term. But this is actually talking about their conversation where Abinthy compared Kvothe to Lanray, saying, basically what happens if you give an intelligent but thoughtless man, a sword, or a powerful and thoughtless man a sword, and all of the damage that can be done. And he was warning him not to fall under the same trap as Lanray, which is being overconfident and proud. And that's why later we see that he names his sword Folly.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, because we kind of, yesterday when we initially filmed this, we were, putting it all together, but now it's nice to say it in a cohesive sentence.
Yeah, we literally spent 10 minutes looking through the book, trying
we went
to
to all the
figure
different
out...
pages.
So yeah, he named his sword after what Abinthy told him, be wary of folly, because it's like, what if you put a sword in a powerful but thoughtless person?
A lot of damage could happen, and I think that's a lesson that Kvothe, just judging by the situation that he is in right now, in hiding, I feel like that's a lesson that he's learned the hard way, that he didn't necessarily heed Abinthy's warning.
The faculty of the mind that deals with pain, I really enjoyed this telling. There is a lot of truth within this. The door of sleep, the door of pain, the door of madness, and the door of death. I have seen in my lifetime people who have traveled these doors too. You can comfort a person who is going through incredible pains, but they are the one that have to walk through these doors. Rothfuss nailed it right on the head with this one, because it's so apt and it makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm. It's really poetically written, But two, even the fact that the first door is the door of sleep, and we know that Lanray, just based on the story, he can no longer sleep. And then that's why Haliax, when he's speaking to both, his voice gets caught on the word sleep. And it's almost like he has no consolation for whatever he's going through. You know, and I wonder if sleep is, you know, more talking about these doors of pain, or if it's just literally just talking about sleep. But I feel like that's what's kind of driving him mad, the lack of consolation. Consolation.
The story of Periel and Telu was interesting. Menda, not Menda, the two roads, and when Ringen crossed over and became Wereth. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting one too. For me, it was a little too on the nose with the Judeo-Christian parallels. It kind of melded a bunch of stories together. The idea that the whole world was bad, everyone was bad. That's very much a parallel to Noah's Day. Telu impregnating Periel with Menda was totally a parallel of the story of Jesus.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you can tell Rothfuss did kind of sift through history, like I said, and I don't know if that's, you know, with Mere Triennial, if it was exactly based on Troy. It just reminded me of it, where these seem like a little more on the nose. But also, too, just even taking the concept of Halloween and New Year's and combining them into one holiday. It's kind of interesting because I feel like it's giving us a history that's foreign, but, you know, that a lot of people can, like, relate to because it's a familiar subject. It's easy for us to, like, remember or understand. So I wonder if that was his goal. But it's hard for me not to get, like, a little distracted. Mm-hmm. Even, like Dakota said, the fact that Abinthi's donkeys are named Alpha and Beta, like, the ties to our world are interesting.
His introduction to Denna. His life is never the same. I love the banter that they have together.
Ugh. That scene when they're on the Waystone and they're talking. I love them. I do. I love it.
She loves it more than me. I don't trust Denna. I never have.
Yeah, he's never liked Denna. I've always loved her.
I don't know what it is about her. I don't think she's right for Kvothe.
I don't agree.
I would never give Kvothe Denna. But speaking of Denna, actually, you also shared with me on Twitter some pictures from a future anthology book that's coming out later this year, I think in November. It's a 10th anniversary of The Name of the Wind, and it comes with 50 extra pages of who knows what, but we do know at least 3 of those pages will be dedicated to pictures from Dan Dos Santos. One of them is a picture of Kvothe right after his parents died, and he ended up in Tarbean, and right before he lost his lute, and it's just a heartbreaking picture.
You can just see, like, the way his hands grip it, like
cradling it.
It's like the only thing he has left to cherish, and we know it's about to be destroyed.
Yeah, poor kid.
I even love the way that the crowd in the back is kind of like in a layer of fog. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't
like
even
they're so
notice
distant.
That. Yeah, it's a good point.
It's really beautiful.
Then we have a picture of Denna.
The lovely.
I wonder who the model was that he, like, chose to model Denna after. Very pretty.
Yeah, it is really beautiful.
And then, of course, the scene with Denna and Kvothe on the Waystone as they were on watch for the caravan. That's a great scene. And it's kind of like a defining moment for Kvothe because it gives him a sense of purpose almost with Denna. I don't know. I love it.
I love how much is left unsaid in that scene. And just, you know, how they're the type of people where neither of them really want to talk about realities, and they can just be dreamers together. I think it's beautiful. Yeah. The way that he describes her is just gorgeous.
Now we also got a video message from Alex Sixworth, aka Siggy Stardust. Let's see what he has to say.
Captain Rothfuss is telling a story from emotion. That Coat is driven emotionally by things in his past, but it's being done in order to build up to specific traditional moments in the hero's journey. So it's almost like an origin story of a hero, except that heroes are subjective. They're a social construct. They're products of the society that makes them. So therefore, Kvothe, or whatever you want to call him, is being made by the world that he's in. And that means that everything he does is based on memories. And it's the memories that are creating the plot. Like every plot device and decision that he makes is based on memories that are created from emotional moments earlier in the story. So the loot, the book, all the plot devices, everything he does, it's all from things that we've already seen happen.
Yeah, great point. I can't agree more, actually, because one thing I like about the way you break things down, Alex, is that you look at it from almost a screenwriter's perspective. Like, how does this scene further the plot? How does this scene affect the character? And you've nailed it. Like, these points, everything that is coming out of Kvothe's memory is changing who he will become and who he will end up being as Kote in this inn. In the middle of Noir. It's really interesting, and yeah, you're totally right. He is telling us the origin of this character, the origin of the legend that everyone knows as Kvothe, at least in this world.
Yeah, and what I love about the way that this is written is I feel like we're more invested in the memories than we are about what's currently happening to him. But I feel like the more that he rises and the farther that the story goes along, because we know that at some point he will become a legend or hero, to me, the more heartbreaking it gets, because you know it's like where he ends up, and you're left with like an open feeling of, or you know, like a hole of like, what happened? Like, I need to understand what went wrong, because you can see that he's just so wounded.
Right.
So I think it is interesting, because I feel like you meet so many people with histories and pasts, and you wonder how it makes them who they are today. So this is a really interesting way to portray that.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much for all the awesome thoughts that you've given us. Again, if you are following along and you just aren't letting us know, just comment your thoughts in the comment section below. We're sorry this is coming out a day and a half late, but we promise to get right back on schedule. We have a lot of other stuff coming out this week, hopefully, if our camera and equipment work with us. But thank you guys so much. If you like this video, you know what to do. If you don't already follow us, I don't know what you're doing here.
Welcome.
Welcome, sir, madam. Anyway.
But yeah, the most important thing is comment. That's the whole reason why we're doing this, is to communicate with you guys, get to know your thoughts about things that we love and have in common. So yeah, please comment, and thank you so much for your patience and the love you show.
Yep. All right, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.